It's a misconception that all founders must be wealthy based on the fact that they have founded a company. So in this session, we'll be discussing how founders can build wealth for themselves personally, and also how to hold on to that wealth and continue growing it once you've made it. We often hear horror stories about women and founders founding companies, but actually they end up owning very little of it at the end of it. So I'm thrilled to introduce our speakers for this next session. We have Christina Leong, Managing Director and Head of Northern California at JP Morgan Private Bank. Denise Woodard, founder and CEO at Partake, and Vicki Saunders, founder of SheEO. I think what's great about all of these panelists is that they're coming from such different viewpoints and perspectives when it comes to creating wealth in the founder community. So welcome everyone. Christine, how are you?
I am well, thank you. Thank you for including us. What a great session so far today.
Thank you. It's great to see you. Have you managed to catch any of the other sessions so far?
I've caught some bits and pieces of them, and I love the advice on at the tail end of this most recent one too.
Yeah, I thought that was brilliant.
Stop what you're doing and building your leadership team and rethink how you're doing it. I love it.
Exactly. So we're just waiting for Denise and Vicki to join. Christine, before they do, I'd love just to introduce you and particularly your role at JP Morgan when it comes to supporting founders.
Great, thanks, Juliet, and hi everyone. I'm honored and humbled to be here today with all of you and my esteemed panelists too, who hopefully will be joining soon. But by way of background, I've actually been at JP Morgan for about 20 plus years. Out here in Northern California since 2001. I think by nature of being here in Northern California, really focusing in on advising entrepreneurs along their journey of inception, formation, all the way through. And we've seen some incredible successes, and we've seen some heartaches along the way too. And our job in running the Northern California business for JP Morgan's private bank, my team and I work very closely with our entrepreneurs and our founders, as well as many other types of executives and family-owned businesses and a lot of other individuals who have created wealth along their journeys. And our job is to really think through holistically the whole balance sheet. And I think sometimes the misnomer in private wealth is we just do the investments. Well, the investments are important, but actually more important. And why I personally also have spent a lot of time on the compensation side of it is really understanding what you own, how you own it, and controlling and advocating for yourself as whether you're a founder or an executive and you're building along the way is really making sure that that piece is well taken care of. So we spend a lot of time advising our clients around that piece of it because the asset allocation piece follows after you build the wealth. But I think it's more important to really understand up front how you build it in the right way.
And Christine, you're based in Northern California, right? So a lot of the founders that you work with coming out of Silicon Valley.
Yes. So I'm based in Northern California in San Francisco. I'm a holdout in our beautiful San Francisco city. But yes, we have, entrepreneurs coming out of Silicon Valley, but I definitely work with a lot of my partners across the country as well, sharing best ideas, best practices, and making sure that we are advising across the country, all of our clients in the right way.
Brilliant, thank you. And I want to say a very warm welcome to Denise. Hi, Denise.
Hi.
Denise is the founder and CEO of Partake, which is a line of nationally distributed allergy-friendly snacks inspired by her daughter's experience with food allergies. It was launched in 2017, and they've seen tremendous growth. So it's great to have a founder like you here, Denise, and would love just to welcome you and just share a bit about your journey so far.
Sure thing. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. As you shared, I'm the founder and CEO of Partake Foods. I spent nearly a decade at Coca-Cola, had an opportunity to lead sales for their venture arm. And then when my family faced the personal problem of my daughter's food allergies, and I was just so frustrated with the options that existed for her, left my career at Coke and launched Partake in August of 2017 as a self-funded, self-distributed company, which really meant selling cookies out of my car to natural food stores across New York City. And that lasted for quite a while, nearly a year. And thankfully, we've seen quite a bit of growth since then. And you'll be able to find our products in about 6,000 stores across the country. We've raised about $7.5 million worth of funding now. But it's been quite the bumpy road to be able to get here. And I'm excited to chat more about that today.
Brilliant. And just for those that have just joined, we're talking about creating wealth in the founder community and have a great panelists that are here with us today. Please do share comments and questions that you have for Christine and Denise and Vicki. And Vicki, I just want to welcome you and say hi. It's great to see you. Vicki's the founder of SheEO and the founder of #Radical Generosity and SheEO, which is a global community of radically generous women supporting women-led ventures working on the world's to-do list. Vicki, I would just love you to introduce yourself and just share a bit about your journey with SheEO.
Thank you. Really happy to be here. So hi, I'm Vicki. I'm Canadian. I'm calling in today from Toronto. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, started a lot of different companies and initiatives and projects over the years, taken a company public, had every kind of funding there is. And I think most of it's super messed up and needs to be redesigned. So I'm really passionate about finance innovation and about systems change and creating a more equitable world. And SheEO is my sort of response to the challenge of funding, but also just the broader kinds of supports that women entrepreneurs need to be successful. And I think that our just like focus on money as the solution to everything is a pretty limited approach to support. And so we've designed our model as women are contributing capital and they pool it into a shared fund, but we all show up with our networks, our expertise, all of our experience, our emotional support, virtual hugs in the Zoom world to support these ventures. And everyone who contributes capital in our network is part of the decision-making for the capital allocation. So it's a very different approach. We don't just have, 4 experts deciding what has the greatest market potential. We ask women to vote in a democratized process, which then leverages their buying power. Because if you're excited about buying or recommending this product or service that you're supporting, we sort of come as thousands of customers to support those businesses to grow. So I think there's tons of different ways to allocate capital, lots of different kinds of capital needed, not just venture. And I'm excited to create the new world with all of you.
It's great to have you on here. Thank you, Vicki. So let's start by just sort of setting the context and the scene. What are some of the biggest misconceptions around creating wealth in the founder community? And Christine, let's start with you from your perspective at JP Morgan.
Well, I think a big one is that, especially I think a lot of the women that I work with is that they're going to be taken care of. My board will take care of me, or, things will it'll all work out in the end. I think that passion that drives so many entrepreneurs to want to put their heads down and kind of build their business and take care of their employees, sometimes they overlook themselves. And I think that unfortunately, I've seen my board will take care of me. They'll give me another grant. They'll give me another round, like as the company is continuing to grow, and then they wake up one day and they've been diluted down a lot. I think that is something that I see quite often, and certainly spend a lot of time educating our clients around making sure that they're advocating and taking care of themselves.
And Denise, from your perspective, coming in as a founder and starting Partake in 2017, were there things that you came in thinking versus what was reality?
I think I took for granted how long the wealth depletion part of the journey would be versus the wealth creation. So I think I was, very much focused on building equity value for the company, but it took a lot of our personal finances to be able to do that early on, because as a woman, as a person of color, it was very hard for us to raise venture funding. We didn't have any accredited family members to go to for investment. So I think there's this misconception that when you become an entrepreneur, somehow money just falls down on you, and that in the earliest of days that there is wealth that is being created in the form of like liquidity. And I don't find that for early stage founders. I think, as you get later into, series Bs and Cs, and later maybe there's options to get some liquidity. But I think in the earliest of days, like, I'm still not the highest paid employee at our company, and I probably won't ever be in it. And I think, that this is definitely not as lucrative from an everyday cash flow perspective as my corporate career was. Much more fulfilling.
The J curve is deep, right, Denise?
Yeah, didn't know how deep that was, but I think there's room for opportunity. But yeah, that
exactly
part, yeah.
And Vicki, what have you seen with the entrepreneurs that you've worked with in terms of the biggest misconceptions around creating wealth for them?
Well, first of all, I have, maybe it's my Canadian side, but I have a very broad view of wealth that goes well beyond money. So let me just start there, which is, I feel like we always just equate this with like financial gain. But for me, it's just like this much larger well-being, your ability to set your own rules, and to have, share your power with others instead of having like always being in these like power relationships where you're asking. And so like to be on the level playing field or like a step or a head above those people, that's like my huge goal of wealth, is to just like be in control of those decisions, or at least have like equal influence. And I, kind of like Christine's earlier comment, I didn't recognize when I was younger, like I took my company public when I was in my early 30s, and I just got fried after we went public. I didn't understand the power dynamics of the board. I didn't understand how I needed to really protect myself. And I was basically booted out of my own company within 18 months. And I, all my friends were like, don't go public, it's a nightmare. You've got this amazing thing. And I'm like, I got this. I was in my 30s. I'm like, I got this, I'm invincible. And so one of the things I've really learned is from all of those lessons, now it's kind of delightful because I get to share a bunch of those things with founders that are coming along, and a lot of the learning. I think a lot of this stuff is pretty opaque. Like, what are the rules around these things are not necessarily shared out loud. And so to be able to share behind the scenes, this is actually what happens. And that's what that word means. And this term sheet means those 3 points in that term sheet are like, they're setting you up to get rid of you as a founder. What do you mean? And I'm like, let me just tell you what's between the lines here. So I think there's quite a bit of learning over the years of this. The systems are quite stacked against any of us scaling our businesses, and particularly women of color. And so, I think sharing these lessons and knowing that there is a game, there is a playbook attached to this game, and understanding the rules is really critical.
That's a brilliant point. And I also loved your point about the meaning of wealth and worth, and our mission is focused on worth beyond wealth. And that does mean a lot more than just your financial wealth, but your emotional and psychological and physical wealth, I think, are all really sort of integral to that as well. So let's talk about the rule book then, and what steps should founders be taking to learn and understand that? And Christine, how do you help your clients understand that?
I love the all of those points, and it's so true. And there is a rule book. You just might not be clued in on what that rule book is. And like Vicki, you learn it along the way, or you learn by looking backwards. I think that, creating your own personal board of directors outside of the company that you've created, so that you have people that you can go to for different things, right? But that can give you kind of the rules along the way in the playbook. To Vicki's point, like, what is that nuance in the term sheet that I wasn't aware of? Or what does this mean? Or how should I be asking for X, Y, and Z? And, I think that for any entrepreneur or founder along the journey, a lot of it is learning along the way. but some of it is stuff that you can learn to get ahead of as you're going through it. So having that personal kind of advisory board is key. I spend a lot of time, like a lot of these venture firms, like First Round Capital or NEA, they will put me and my team in front of their entrepreneurs to really make sure that they're being educated along the way as they think about building their companies. I do a lot of panels, like get people in your Rolodex, right? Like I just finished a panel earlier today on compensation. So like know what you should be paid and where the data is. Don't just rely on what you think it should be, so that you can advocate for yourself in those areas too. But I do think having all of those different kind of personal board of advisors outside of your own business is key to understanding and learning those rules and that rule book along the way.
That's come up a couple of times today, actually, both in terms of trying to get your first board seat as well. So it's really interesting. Denise, do you have your own personal board outside?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. It's made up of friends and colleagues, angel investors of ours. We were lucky enough to be a part of the Launch with Goldman Sachs Accelerator for Black and Latinx companies last year, and had the opportunity to get in front of a lot of their teammates and be able to ask them questions. And I think for me, it's just been getting really comfortable with being vulnerable about what I don't know so that I can learn quickly, and just saying like, that sounds like a foreign language to me. I've never done this before. And then also in my personal board of advisors, I think it's often like people want to get the shiniest companies and the companies that have gotten the most funding or the founders who've had the biggest exits. For us, I found that, founders that have been really valuable to talk to are ones that maybe didn't have perfect experiences, maybe ones whose companies aren't around anymore. And so I think it's a lot easier to remember what you wish you would have done differently when your situation isn't as rosy. And so seeking those folks out has been really helpful for me as well.
Vicki, do you have a personal board of directors, and also do you act as a personal board member for people in your community?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone asks me, I'm happy to give advice. I try not to give unsolicited advice because I know I wouldn't have listened to myself anyway back in the day. But yeah, if people are curious, I'm quite happy to share. So yeah, I have just a massive network of people that I tap into for different kinds of things. And to Denise's point, I have like a big long list of things I did wrong. So I'm quite useful to people along the way. I did not do things perfectly at all. And yeah, I think it's just absolutely critical. And I think one of the things I'd like to underline is that there's quite a narrative around what is success, what kind of capital is success. And I just really think all bets are off on that for the future. Like, it's extremely important. If you're an entrepreneur, you set the rules for yourself. You don't have to have venture capital if you don't want to. Like, less than 1% of companies really need VC. I'm a huge lover of like all things bootstrapped, if you can do that, and debt financing if you can get it on the kinds of terms that allow you to build the company the way you want to. And I'm all about very big social impact and doing things quite differently, and paying really great salaries to people in places where the rest of the world doesn't do that. And so if you're not in control of your capital in your company that way, you can't do those things. And so at SheEO, we're always funding women on their own terms, asking them what's success for them, what are the milestones they want to hit. And that's very different than other kinds of funding where they set your milestones for you. You miss those milestones, they're like taking a chunk out of you. They're taking, they're getting more warrants, or you get penalized for missing things that are made up, by the way. I just really don't get this whole place of like, everything is a projection. It's like all made up and conditions change, right? And then entrepreneurs get penalized for these kinds of things. So I just think the rules are all screwed up and really need to shift. And so I think this reminder to entrepreneurs that you can set your own terms. Capital comes with terms attached to it. Know that. Understand that different kinds of capital have different kinds of rules. And if you sign up for that kind of capital, you are playing that game. It's very hard to get out of that. And if you want to play a game on your own terms, then there's certain kinds of capital that just should be off the table for you. So understand that, I think, is really critical.
That's really interesting. So what variables, like what advice would you give to entrepreneurs just starting out, and what variables should they use in determining how to fund their business, and whether you go down the bootstrap route, whether you go for investment VC funding, what advice do you have there?
Yeah, well, I'm very much of the mind that like everybody's different. People are running things differently. I personally have chosen with SheEO, we do 0% interest loans, which is like now a thing in the world, which is awesome. Because 5 years ago, people were like, what is that weird thing you're doing over there? That's not growth capital. And now we're living in a 0% interest world, right? So this is a really interesting kind of capital. And we have people that are somewhere between 50K and 2 million in revenue. They're in market. They've got some customers, they've got a bit of product market fit, and they have the potential to like really scale something up. We're providing these 0% interest loans, but what comes around that is all of us as customers, influencers at that early stage to really rocket what you're doing with your business. You may get some angel capital after. We're about to launch follow-on funding in our community, and that will be on the terms of the entrepreneurs. So they set the terms, and our activators, the women who are in this fund, decide whether or not to follow. And so everything we do is power with instead of power over. And it's shifting the playbook around this. And you can only do that in an environment built on trust. And we also really I believe more in the preservation of capital, strong social impact, lift off your capital, and then recycling that capital through the community versus the rich get richer, everyone's shooting for a 10X to have more. I'm like, what are you gonna do with all that money? Like, what, really? Don't you have enough? How about like actually putting it into these people that are like changing the world with their businesses? So I have a pretty radical view on this. But I think like we're in a state of like concurrent massive crises coming at us. And do we really need another like 750 million bucks into a pizza truck to get it there faster and hotter made by a robot? Like really, that's what we're doing with our money? So I talk to a lot of people that are holders of wealth to like, how do you want to use your money to make any meaningful impact in the world and get it into the hands of those founders, and then really encourage those founders to set the rules themselves for what they want with that capital and build their wealth that way instead of following someone else's path.
I love that. I love that, Vicki, and that mindset. I think it's brilliant. And also, Denise, I'm looking to you because you're you started with a very clear need and a very clear purpose. And I have a kid that has a nut allergy, so I'm like, okay. And I saw a few other people commenting on that as well. So it's clearly a product with a purpose behind it. Christine, interested in your thoughts around advice to your clients and entrepreneurs that you work with around capital versus bootstrap.
Yeah, I mean, Vicki, it's amazing to hear you say this and say it to more people and say it more often, right? I think that the choices, there's a lot of capital that you can choose from. There's money chasing deals. And you had asked one of the questions of like, some of the biggest challenges. I think first and foremost, as Denise knows, like if you're going to start something, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And if it's truly a passion project, if you can combine the capital that you want to take in, to Vicki's point, you have the ability to run it for longer and drive it the way you want to drive it. And I think so often I see a lot of founders or entrepreneurs kind of in that quest for, I need that capital quickly, kind of defaulting to the natural venture side, where then you are truly beholden. But knowing that, and again, I think it also comes down to the broader your network, the broader the connectivity that you can then access the different types of capital that's out there, but also the education around what other capital exists for you is really important to know that it's not a one way out only. And I think that the nature of the capital kind of market where you can access the game has changed. It's no longer the VCs controlling it. And I think the more that the founders and the entrepreneurs, and there are some incredible VCs out there too, don't get me wrong, right? But you've got to decide kind of the trade-off and the VC's approach too, right? There's some incredible VCs that are out there funding kind of women owned, but they're looking at it from a social impact standpoint or a double bottom line or a recycled capital piece. And they're letting the entrepreneurs truly define how they want to do it versus putting those metrics out there for you, right? That's a little bit older school, but I do think that's important, is knowing that there's choice out there, but also going in with the mindset of this is a deep J curve, right? This is a marathon, not a sprint, and that you're in it to create something incredible. The money and the wealth, if you will follow.
Denise, a couple of points. It does feel like it shifted the whole VC world and this sort of, and I think there's a gender element to this, which was because I had a lot of friends that are women entrepreneurs, and there was almost pressure to take VC funding and kind of focus on this 10x growth. And I do think that has shifted, and the awareness and understanding of it has shifted, which is, I think, personally, a really positive thing. Denise, how has your perception shifted since launching Partake, and what does sort of the roadmap look like for you as you grow over the next couple of years?
Sure. So we've tapped into multiple methods of funding. We started with a Kickstarter. So we did crowdfunding initially, and then we self-funded the business from the idea all the way through our launch at Whole Foods and Wegmans and other regional grocers, probably to a detriment, like emptying my 401k, selling my engagement ring because we couldn't raise the capital. So not necessarily to the point I would recommend. And then we went and raised some friends and family capital. So really friendly funding, people who really believed in our mission, people who believed in what we were doing at the earliest stages. And then we've raised some VC funding. And thankfully, we've been in a position to pick which VCs that we've worked with. And so they're very much mission aligned from a social mission perspective. Very much, they are investors. So there is a double bottom line, but there is some element of passion over profit, where we've been able to really dive deep into social mission efforts, whether it's we launched an HBCU fellowship program to increase diversity in the natural food space. We've fed thousands of food insecure families that are managing food allergies. And so we've been able to lean into the causes that are important to us. But I think it's because we were able to, on very limited means, get the company to a more scalable place where we were able to speak up and set some of the terms. It was a hard journey, but it was very important to me that we do that, because I've seen so many founder friends who were so brilliant with amazing products lose their company, have to change the trajectory, have to change totally what they were doing, have to do things, agree to do things that didn't align with their beliefs. And it was important to me because the mission of Partake is so personal, and starting it because of my daughter, that we weren't in that position. So it meant going a little bit slower. It meant having a few more bumps. It meant no more engagement ring, but I'm so glad that we had the journey that we did.
Do you have an engagement ring now?
I have a band, which is much more comfortable anyway. And I'm fine, my husband's fine, and the business is thriving and wins. So no complaints, but I didn't know that's what I was signing up for necessarily when I had this idea to start a food company.
And there's a question from Kimberly Wasey that said, what if you can't afford that first part of that deep J? And if you have a family to support, or you don't have money, or you don't have an engagement ring, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs that are starting up that don't necessarily have access to their own personal capital?
I think it just kind of may affect the method at which you start, or the investment that you're able to make into maybe marketing. So maybe you start with D2C first, and not invest as much into social media ads. Maybe if the world was open, you would start at farmers market for a food company. And so I think it just changes the path a little bit, and does present some challenges, but is doable. Vicki,
thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's just such a great point. I really think that and you're dropping all kinds of amazing wisdom, Denise, because the whole thing about there isn't only one way to start, right? Again, there's so many different pathways. And so I love this, we have this venture that started the first zero waste grocery store, but she didn't start with the store, right? She started at a farmer's market talking about her vision for food and what it looked like. And then Patagonia saw it, and she did a little pop-up in a Patagonia store, built more community. Then she launched her store, and then COVID hit, and boom, zero waste, bulk stuff during COVID. What do you do? And then pivoted online, has this whole cool new approach. And I think, the pathway is just, it's the persistence, and you're sticking with that. You're so passionate about doing what you're here to do. The path will reveal itself. Get into communities, keep asking, keep reaching out to people. And it will show up. I've seen it over and over, is when you are committed, the universe has its own timing. Unfortunately, it doesn't always match what entrepreneur's timing is. It's the only thing you know as an entrepreneur is whatever plan you have is not what's going to happen. And so it's that persistence and reaching out to communities, I think, is really critical. And also there is just a huge inequity out there with a privileged gap of those who have access and those who don't. And that's why networks are just super critical to get into.
Networks like SheEO as well. And Christian, when a founder begins accumulating wealth, how do they hold on to it? And at that point, what advice are you giving?
So we spend a lot of time on kind of the, flipping to the compensation piece of it, right? So a founder's now, accumulated wealth, the company's growing, maybe they've done a couple of rounds, is really making sure that they're not getting super diluted down. And I always say, like, once you flip from founder to a point where you're kind of a little bit more later stage now, and you're now really running and operating a different type of a company, is even looking at some of the additional equity grants as a now moving from founder to CEO. And presumably your equity on the founder side has been, vested, is looking at additional kind of performance grants, if you will, for the CEO and founder to kind of keep your equity there. And then, I also think we're educating a lot, and we're spending a lot of time on the cash burn. Most entrepreneurs by nature don't need a lot of that kind of day-to-day cash. So, seeing how much and trying to hold on to as much equity as you can and not have to sell into kind of secondary markets so that you get that liquidity. So we're kind of giving advice along the way there. And really, as I say, like, continuing to advocate for yourself. There are so many founder CEOs that I come across that don't have employment agreements. And now they're further along in their company. They're hiring CFOs or hiring other executives, and they don't have their own agreement that really takes care of them. And again, this depends on the capital that you're taking, and if it's still, 100% owned, however kind of that looks. But I do think that that is important, especially as if the path of exit is an IPO or a sale. There's all of these changing control provisions and, kind of pre-IPO kind of milestones that should be put in place to take care of yourself.
And what about this is obviously further down the line, but how should founders think about generational wealth and then passing it down?
Yeah. So for all of the founders out there, there is something incredibly cool called qualified small business stock. And I'm going to just spend 1 second on it because I think it's really important, or maybe more than 1 second. But it's essentially a small business tax credit for those that own stock for 5 years in a qualified small business stock, which is essentially a C Corp that has less than 50 million in assets or less than 50 million in funds raised. If you hold that stock for 5 years and beyond, assuming you start it anytime kind of now through the future, 100% of that gain of the first 10 million is exempt from federal taxes, which is incredible. And so if you think about that, even as a founder, when you're starting your company, early exercise your stock file, the 83B, and take ownership, even though you may have not been vested when you're starting your own company. So that's critical, that's important, that's key. You start that clock for 5 years. And then as you think about generational planning, right, I always say that it's more important to make sure you have enough wealth on your own balance sheet first, and never give away too much. But to the extent you watch your wealth build and you grow, there's always going to be the second tax, which is there's income tax and then there's estate tax, the estate tax piece. And so how do you think about moving some of that growth and future appreciation to future generations? The coolest part about qualified small business stock is you can actually multiply that $10 million exemption by gifting some of your ownership in your company to children, for example. So you have 2 children, they each get 10 million as well. So there's some pretty powerful planning tools you can do. But what I always say that number one, it comes down to really understanding what you own and how you own it. And, I have so many founder CEOs that come to me and they're like, okay, I've got founder shares, all founder shares. And then you look at it and you're like, you've got founder shares and you've got options, but you didn't start the exercise on that. And, we need to talk through that. And now it's more costly. And really, so it's never too early to start thinking about it and understanding it. There may be nothing to do, but at least you've understood it so that along the journey, as your company grows, as your balance sheet naturally kind of grows as part of that, you've thought about how best to optimize around your ownership.
That's brilliant advice. We've got a couple more minutes for questions. As a women entrepreneur, how do you get access and exposure to that capital when that trust has not been built? How do you get the VC to take that step to invest in you, like they have given male counterparts the benefit of the doubt, giving women the opportunity to succeed or fail or redirect? Vicki, thoughts on that?
Again, out there response to this one, but like, no convincing anybody who isn't running towards you with energy and love and excitement for what you're doing, because they are like painful relationship to be in with someone you're trying to convince and like be in a, yeah. So don't go there, walk away, assume abundance, and find the people that love what you're doing like that. You just need to have that base. It's so hard without that. That's my response.
And I would add to that, Vicki,
Yeah,
that if you have those, the board of advisors and those supporters and that community around you helping you, they're hopefully helping connect you with the people that are running towards you.
And Denise, your experience, was that your experience? Like you connect with the investors that you choose?
Yes, in my situation, I felt like it was a little easier said than done. But as Vicki mentioned, the universe just seems to have a way of bringing abundance to you when you're in it for the right reason and you believe in what you're doing and you're passionate. So I will say that we nearly took money from investors that probably would have been a terrible fit for us because we were nearly out of money. And so it's easy to say, be very selective, but when your business is on its last leg, it's also like, it's hard. You're in a hard, like between a rock and a hard place. But thankfully we've only entered into relationships that we are excited about. But I think the way to also do that is to build a really strong, sustainable business with metrics that you can stand on, outside of your gender, outside of your ethnic background. And so if you can, the proof is in the pudding. I think a lot of times the proof is in the traction. And so building a business that you're proud of, that you understand the metrics on, I think is also really helpful, because more people will be running to you with love and wanting to work with you, I think, if you have a strong business model.
And a question from Mira, would you please discuss how to secure sales in the early stages of business? I mean, I guess it depends what product or service you're selling, but Denise, what was your experience in the very early stages of selling your product?
It was literally going door to door to natural food stores in New York. I poached one of our competitors' store list and I visited all of those stores because I thought, well, if they're interested in this product that's similar and I think ours is better, they'll probably be interested in ours. And it was selling the features and the benefits in the story and then going every single evening to do demos so people for a food product could try the product and taste the product. And thankfully, that's how we were able to get our first sale. So it was very rudimentary, but thankfully it worked.
Vicki, any thoughts on that?
No, nothing more to say. It's just hustle, get out there, find the people, find the customers. I think maybe if I could just add like one other thing as we're just about to close off here, but I think it's probably important to say that entrepreneurs have a risk profile, which is off the charts, right? Like I will mortgage my house over. I have mortgaged my house over and over and over. My husband's all in for it, which is great. But like, I don't think of that as a risk. I'm just like, oh, well, I'm just investing myself. It's fine. But there's a shadow side to that, right? So I think just for everybody out there, the good news is that you take all these risks and you create a lot of value. The bad news is you take a lot of risk with yourself too, and don't necessarily, cover your underlying. I had a chance when we went public they're like, do you want to sell $1 million worth of shares now? Because there's, we're oversubscribed. And you can have something in the bank. And I'm like, let it ride, right? And I'm like, no, if I was doing that over again, I might have said, maybe just have a little safety box over here, but that wasn't my personality. So there's a shadow side to that too, to pay attention as an entrepreneur.
That's great advice. So last question for all of you, in sort of less than 30 seconds, what actions do founders need to take to start to scale progress when it comes to building and accumulating and retaining wealth? Vicki, you go first.
Find the others, find your people that are going to support you and help you along the way. Call it your board of directors, whatever that is, but people that will really be with you on this journey.
Denise?
I hate to be a copycat, but I think that's a huge part of it. What Vicki said, like finding your community, being vulnerable with that community, like really telling them how it is and where your challenges are and looking for help and receiving that.
Brilliant. And Christine?
I'm going to say the same thing, but also make sure that you're asking and advocating for yourself and you have that community and that group, but that you're asking the questions and for help. It's okay. But make sure you advocate for yourself.
That was a brilliant discussion, and thanks for sharing such great perspectives, all of you. I think there was some great practical advice there. Also, check out Partake. I think there is a discount floating around, and a link to buy the product. And Denise, really good luck with the growth of your company. Vicki, same. Please check out SheEO. It's a great community. And Christine, thanks for your brilliant advice and input. Christine is Managing Director and Head of Northern California at JP Morgan Private Bank and works with a lot of entrepreneurs. So thanks so much for all of your expertise and for being on here and being generous with your time. Thank you all.
Thanks for including us.